One of the girls, all of a sudden, was overcome with sadness and dropped right to her knees, crying uncontrollably. That freaked the rest of us out, so we picked her up and put her in the car and left fast. Keep in mind, we didn't really hear much of anything. We may have seen an apparition in the window, but that was about it. But the presence up there, I can't explain it. It just feels wrong, like you're being watched and followed. I'm man enough to admit I'm too scared to return there. This story starts with a group of my friends and myself going backpacking in Yellow River State Park. 6 of us were backpacking through the hills during late fall, so there was a lot of dead sticks and leaves all around. Yet, not very many other backpackers until we came across of a couple of guys heading the opposite way. As we came close to them, they stopped and told us that we shouldn't go down into the valley, as they were there for the last 2 nights. We asked why not, and they said that they heard people talking near their tent in the middle of the night, even though they were the only ones there. My friends and I shrugged it off, because we ourselves have drunkenly wandered around at night exploring and stargazing. We continued down into the valley and set up our tents. There was 2 of us in each tent. 3 of us brought firearms, just because we were kind of paranoid. We would rather have them and not need them instead of not having them and needing them, due to previous experiences. We get all set up and break out our liquor and cards and play a few games in front of the fire before we decide to call it a night. One of our friends passed out in front of the fire and didn't wake up when we tried to move him, so we decided we would just let him make his own way to the tent when he was ready, and ended up going to bed without him. All of a sudden, we are woken up in the middle of the night of a semi-drunk slumber to our friend screaming at the top of his lungs, high-pitched and everything. We jumped out of our tents to find out why our friend was yelling. Who the hell was that? We had no clue what he was talking about until we saw his face. Now, you know when your friend is the first person to pass out at a party, you doodle all over his face with Sharpie? Well, apparently, some stranger was doing the same thing with charred wood and ashes. The problem was that he had an upside-down cross on his forehead and a pentagram on his shirt. I'm not religious at all, but I was kind of freaked out. We ended up going back into the tent, but I don't think any of us got much sleep. Then, at about 3:30 a.m., we started to hear rustling in the woods around us. It seemed to be everywhere, though. Then, we heard a voice say, "Give him to us." Now, I was freaked out and loaded a round into my pistol, but my friend seemed to jump the gun. Yes, same trigger-happy friend, and fired a round from his .22 into the air, through his tent. I then hear people running away from what seemed to be all around us. Needless to say, at first light, we packed up and got the hell out of there. We contacted the county sheriff's office and told them what happened, but they simply told us that there really wasn't much we could do besides report it. My fiance and I postponed our wedding in 1990. We were getting stressed and needed a vacation. We lived on the Big Island in Hawaii, so naturally, we went to the mainland. We did not have much money, so we rented a car, bought a tent, and decided to try to visit and camp in as many state/national parks in the western U.S. as we could. We were driving in the middle of nowhere on our way to Yellowstone. It was a desert-like area we were driving through, and it was the end of September. It was very hot. We saw an old building far from the road and decided to take a break to explore it. As we approached the building, we could hear flies and the smell of something bad. We opened the door and it was like a big farm building. The walls and metal roof were splattered in blood. Everywhere we looked were body parts of elk. I am from the islands, but my fiance was from Northern California and familiar with wildlife. He said they were elk bodies. There must have been at least 50 or more of them in there. It was so strange. They looked like they were torn apart. Pieces of meat were flung and hung all over inside the building. I freaked out and started to cry. The smell and sights were overwhelming. My fiance said he couldn't understand it, because it was not like they were being processed or collected for anything. All the meat or horns or everything else was just in there, strewn apart. And he said it looked like they were torn apart, not cut with a knife. I had to go. I felt like I was in shock. My fiance refused to let me call the police. He said he did not want to get involved. He said it must be the work of the poachers. A few miles later, we entered Yellowstone National Park, where, as usual, we chose an out-of-the-way campsite. We were on high alert as we had been listening to a news story on the radio about a female hiker camping in a remote area of the park alone. Apparently, she was torn apart by a grizzly bear. There were few details about the attack, and I'm sure I'm unable to find any written reports of it anywhere online. Because we heard the news report on the radio for several days before getting to the park, I find it odd that I can't find much on it. We had a campsite with a bathroom nearby and a barbecue. There were very few people in the park and no one camping near us. There were signs everywhere warning people that they should be careful with food storage because of the bears. We had a couple beers and went to sleep in the tent. I often got hungry after dinner and decided to take a bag of pears into the tent, thinking that if I put it under my pillow, that no animals could smell it there. Remember, I'm from Hawaii. We do not have wild animals here. There are no bears, skunks, possums, squirrel, chipmunk, armadillo, wolverines, elk, lions, or snakes. We do have deer and boar in the mountains, but they were introduced by European hunters like 100 years ago or so. I fell asleep, pears snugly under my pillow. I was awakened by an immense weight on my upper right side of my chest. My entire right arm and right side of my torso was felt like it was stuck. My first thought was bear. There's a bear on top of me wanting my pears. But as the seconds developed into minutes, and the minutes turned into hours, this immersive weight never once moved, nor did it shift, or twitch, or even make a single sound. In the first second, I decided not to move or make any noise, and definitely not awaken my boyfriend, who was soundly asleep to my left. I felt myself beginning to panic, thinking that it had to be a bear attracted to my pears or something. But as time dragged on, I realized that this were a wild animal. It was literally on top of me, inches from the fruit. It would have pawed or done something to get inside the tent, or at least shifted, moved, or snorted, or breathed as living things do. But to me, I felt like a car was parked on the upper right half of my body. The way it was so heavy and unmoving. What the weirdest aspects besides it being a massive, unmoving, totally silent something was that it was warm. This flurry of thoughts and confusion literally dragged on for hours. I became so terrified and overwhelmed. I knew whatever was sitting or standing or laying or parked on me could not have been of this world. Once, after all the hours of trying not to breathe heavily, panic, or even twitch a muscle, I passed out cold from sheer terror. My mind and body just shut down. I totally understand now, when people see a cryptid or a monster, why they faint or lose bowel control. The big difference with me was I could not see it, I could only feel it. And thinking it was a grizzly bear, that could cause its razor-sharp teeth and claws to easily get into the tent, which made it so more confusing. When I woke up the next day, my fiance was already up. I told him what happened, and I was completely freaked out. I checked the tent for any marks or signs of something on the fabric, but there was nothing. There was also no suspicious paw prints or footprints around the tent campsite. Instead of listening to my story, my fiance stopped me at the part about the pears under the pillow and scolded me for quite a while. I was totally still freaked out and wanted to leave. My right arm and the right side of my body were aching. That was not a dream, nor was it sleep paralysis. I have never been that terrified in all of my life. Never before since that has happened. I told this story to an experienced Sasquatch researcher, and he said these types of tent antics are pretty common with juvenile Sasquatch. Today, many researchers and witnesses believe that Sasquatch can actually see through the tent fabric somehow and enjoy harassing campers. He calls campers within tents sack lunches. He described how campers tell of being in their zipped-up tent and then being picked up and carried several feet away. Other witnesses describe hearing their tent zipper unzip and a hairy hand reach in to touch them. I think what convinced me that this was a Sasquatch reclining on my tent was that what the research explained about Sasquatch abilities, that are able to remain unmoving, even without a twitch or spasm for literally hours at a time. He pointed out how in nature, they use this ability to camouflage themselves so effectively. Last Thursday night, me and my fiance were driving around looking for something to do, around 11 p.m. Our friend Sierra called us and asked if we wanted to meet her and her new boyfriend at a diner in town. We got there and had some pies and decided we should do something. None of us had to work Friday, so we were going to hit the bars. Me and my fiance went to grab another friend of ours who wanted to come. After we got him, we all met back up at the 7-Eleven. It turned out that all the bars were empty, so we were brainstorming what to do instead. That's when Sierra suggested we go to the cemetery. We live in a city at the end of the Oregon Trail, and what used to be the outskirts of the city was a little state park. The park is located on top of a large cliff. Also, about a mile from the parking lot is a cemetery you can only go to by walking. The cemetery used to be an Indian graveyard, but over time, they would put people who lived in the city in the graveyard too. Also, settlers used to chase off Indians off this cliff in droves, and many of the people of Indian descent have committed suicide by jumping off this cliff. Honestly, the whole place is just creepy and has this vibe, even during the day. Anyway, my fiance was really against it, but the group talked him into just going to the park. We get there around 1 a.m., and we are standing at the top of the cliff which overlooks the city. Everything is okay for a while, but then my fiance quiets everyone down, and I swear to God we both heard footsteps to our left. Our whole group was to our right. We freaked out and made the whole group leave. As we were leaving, I looked at my fiance and something to our left caught my eye. It's a bright ball. It came up from the top of the tree, made an arc and came back down. It wasn't like transparent like a flashlight. It was a solid, like if the moon were really off in the distance, but still really bright and white. I even thought it was the moon for a second, but then I looked up and saw the moon big and full, and red, from smoke from fires all over the state. Later in the car, I asked my fiance and our friend that we picked up earlier if they had seen it too. They had, so I wasn't going crazy for a second. There was actually something there. As we got to the car, my fiance looks behind us and swears he saw another white orb in the forest. But it couldn't have been a lamp or something because we were at the edge of the city and there weren't houses for miles. Also, there were no other cars in the parking lot, so it couldn't have been another person. Anyway, we drove out there as fast as we could. We dropped off our friend, and he had me
Yeah, I
drive
can take
his
this
car
thing right
because he
here
was too
without
freaked out.
using the cord.
By the time I drove
Sheetrock
myself
covers
home,
over
he
this
seemed
door
fine.
right here, say,
Looking back, I really
that you're
wish there was
covering the
something
door
I
where a
could do.
door's gonna be.
Yeah.
Right after he
You
dropped
take
me
this
off,
thing
everything
right
was
here,
fine for a while. But
push
once we
your
started
hole in
driving
there.
around the back
I
roads
forgot my
near his
coat.
house,
Put your hole in there,
things began to happen
and it
again.
goes
We listened to music on Pandora while driving.
it's out.
Well, mid-song, the
Cool.
track somehow skipped
But it
from
does,
Tiny
it is
Dancer to
dusty.
Dance with the Devil. Then,
That's one
Will you hand me
thing.
my coat in there, baby?
he slammed on the brakes so not
Sure
to hit
will.
it. He looked behind in the mirror to make sure there wasn't someone driving behind. That's when he saw a pair of eyes and dark outline of a person in his back seat.
Yeah, one of these
Then the
corners
song
right
changed
here,
back to Tiny Dancer and the
the
figure was
Dewalt,
gone. He parked the car in the
$249.
driveway and ran inside on full panic.
Really?
Yep.
Nothing else happened that night,
Okay.
but he was a
And
bag
this
of
is
nerves
what I
for
got
days.
down below there for, God, I ain't got $100 in both of them.
Oh.
$475 worth
The
of
following
drills
story involves a group of my
I got 2
friends and I
batteries, a
backpacking
charger.
in Yellow River State Park.
and 2,
6 of us were
pieces of,
backpacking in the late fall,
2
when not
drills,
many
basically.
people were around, when we came across a couple of guys heading in the
Well,
opposite
they do.
direction.
Hard to cut on, huh?
They
Well, it
informed
is.
us we shouldn't
Brand
go
new.
to the valley,
Never been
as
used.
they spent the last couple of
This
nights
here-
there
How'd she get
hear
it?
people talking outside the
Nice.
tent at night. Despite
This
no
one here
one
still
being
hasn't been
around,
used yet.
my friend and I laughed it
That's
off.
what I've been was afraid of, how long these batteries might hold up.
I didn't think much of the
But now
story.
they got 2 batteries, it won't matter.
We eventually reached the valley instead of our tent.
So you can use it at work.
There were
Oh
2
yeah,
of us
this is
per
what we
tent,
use at work.
and 3 of us had firearms on us.
Sure is.
After setting up, we broke out the liquor in cars to play some games before calling it a night. By the end of the card games, one of our
This is
friends
what
had passed
Ends
out
up
near the
causing a
fire.
lot of
We
arguments with
decided
courts.
that we'd leave him there putting
Because
the
we got
fire
2
out,
routers going.
as they weren't getting out.
Me and Junior will have a
Later
router,
that
and Tony and
night,
them's
we
got a
were
router, and we
awoken
got
to the
cords
sound of our
going,
friends
you
screaming.
know, each side of
Who
the
the hell
house.
was that?
They get more than 1 or
Having
2
no
cords
clue
hooked
what he
up,
was
they'll
on
be
about, we
fucking
all looked at
tangled. They
him
don't give
and
a fuck how
realized
they
someone had
run
drawn
through
the
the
stake
rooms. They'll run
attached
through
to the
studs
fire.
and go into a room.
They'd drawn an
The next
upside
thing you
down
know,
cross
they're
on
all
his
twisted
forehead
and
and a
tangled, and you're there
pentagram on his
15
shirt.
minutes trying to untangle the bitches to
I'm
get them
not
all
religious by
rolled
any
back
means,
up.
but I was
Tony
pretty
will leave
freaked
them laying
out
in the
by
floor.
this.
You know, don't matter if anybody's walking through the house that weekend or not. He'll leave some bitches rolled out in the middle of the floor over studs and all that. Somebody goes in there and trips over them, guess what? You know, that's a shit like that you don't think about. Even though it's a minute thing, it's something that you gotta really sort of watch and look out for. Especially if you're the one calling.
Yeah.
I freaked out and loaded a pistol, but my friend fired a round from his .22 into the air immediately. The sounds of people running away surrounded us all from all sides. The moment we had light, we left and also reported what happened to sheriffs, as they said they could do nothing but take a report.
Yeah.
A lot of help they were. Be careful out in Yellow River State Park.
Your duty was done.
All right.
When I was 24, I went to Newton Battlefield State Park in Elmira, New York, with an ex-girlfriend of mine and one of her friends. We spent the day exploring and visiting all the signs that had information about how it had been a battle site in old wars, and had been visited by George Washington as well as other notable historical figures. I found it all quite fascinating, even though I wasn't much of a history buff myself. Anyway, the sun had set about an hour or 2 prior, and we settled into our cabin. Now, I will say we had beer and weed on us, but up to this point, we had only one the first blunt. I say this so you know the intoxication wasn't a factor, as we were pretty straight at that point. It was dark along the pathway that we were walking. We all had our backs to the cabin. I heard footsteps coming up the walkway, and quickly stashed the illegal leafy substance under my camping chair. As I put it away, and my ex and her friend both heard the steps as well, and looked in the direction of the walking noise, in the distance, light of the campfire, we saw a set of eyes. The noise soon walked past the right side of the cabin before continuing on past and eventually to the left side of the cabin, where it stopped on the side of the cabin we were sitting on. I felt we were busted as I hid the weed under the chair before I asked, "Is there anything I can help you with?" There was no reply, and all I could make out was the eyes glowing with the light of the fire. We grabbed the flashlight I had in my lap and turned it on. I went to point it at the eye, but before I could beam it into the eyes, it turned away, as though it was going to continue on its path. When I finally arrived where this thing would be, there was nothing but the sound of walking continuing down the path. We spent the rest of our night in the cabin, too freaked out at what we saw and heard. I've only ever experienced 4 to 5 paranormal events in my life, and this is one that I question the most. After all, I wasn't alone in my experience this time. I am 29 years old and have been researching and investigating the paranormal since I had my first experience at the age of 9 in 1998. I'm an extremely realistic and logical person who is not easily excited over things that go bump in the night. I have seen and experienced some things in my life that most people have not. Some don't believe and some do believe, but that's okay, because I'm not here to convince anyone of anything. I'm just here to share. My lights in the sky experience happened a few years ago in 2014. I was living in New York and went to Jones Beach State Park one fall night with a friend of mine. It was a chilly night, so we didn't plan on staying out too long, but it was nice to be able to walk along the boardwalk without dealing with the crowds of people. We soon stopped at the covered picnic area and to sit down and chat. The night was clear enough to see the stars, which can sometimes be difficult with all the light pollution on Long Island. We lost track of time with our conversations, and as we got up to leave, I had to glance up at the sky. I love the stars, and I noticed something odd. A very bright light had appeared over the horizon that wasn't there a moment ago. My friend, seeing that I was staring off into space, looked up and thankfully saw it as well. Two initial thoughts crossed our minds. One, it was an airplane. Or two, it was just another star. We watched it for a few solid minutes, but it never moved from where it sat, ruling out the possibility of it being an airplane. Side note, my boyfriend is an airplane pilot, and I spend a lot of time watching airplanes. This definitely was not one. So, a few moments go by when we notice a second light, just as bright as the first, appears seemingly out of nowhere. It manifested right below the first light, and just hovered there. Naturally, we looked at one another perplexed. When we looked back up again, a third light was now appearing below the first two. I don't know how long we stood there looking at these lights, but we did verbally discuss all the possibilities that might explain what they were. We tried very hard to be realistic in debunking this phenomenon. After a while, the lights shifted, taking a triangular pattern. Again, we stood mesmerized. They did not change positions again. After what felt like forever, we finally decided that we should leave as it was starting to get late. We started to walk away, assuming that when we looked back these lights would be gone. Interestingly enough, though, they weren't. They stayed right up there in the sky in that triangular pattern for almost our entire walk back out to the car. Only when we reached the park exit did they disappear. We believe what we saw were UFOs, though I'm not 100% comfortable labeling it as alien per se. UFO does stand for Unidentified Flying Object, which is exactly what they were. It was just one of my many inexplicable experiences I've had thus far in life. I wish we had a definitive answer as to what we saw out there that night.
Hey, Barb,
What?
If nothing else, you ain't got nothing else that'll go over. What you might could do is them curtains that was in that window, take and cut them off, and put the rod wherever the TV
My
is.
boyfriend and I
Because we
headed
don't want
to a
people
state
looking in there
park
at
near
night.
us. It's far
You know what I
enough
mean?
out so there is no noise or light pollution.
Actually,
But it
there's
gets
two
dead
panels of
silent
that
out there
shows,
quite
not just
often.
one. I was thinking just
You
one
have to
panel
drive
was
a few
gonna
miles
show
at a
two
time
of
to
them.
get there.
Hell,
And it's
that's as
nothing
much
short
as
of a desert
light
and
that's getting in
farmland.
there at any time.
Once you pull in, you
Yeah.
can choose whether to go to the left to the nearest park side or turn right and drive out to some more past to the Bison to the farthest side. This was before the park turned public, so at the time, there was no curfew. It's a really cool park. It actually has trees and ponds. It's a quick getaway from life pretty much, and it's so quiet and the privacy is nice. We decided to go to the nearest side of the park, and we talked and walked around until it got dark. Once it was dark, we laid in the back of his truck, looking at the stars and made out. It was a beautiful summer night. It was 1 or 2 in the morning when we finally decided to leave. We made our way out of the park slowly. We were about to turn and exit when we saw a car entering. There's only one way to enter and exit the park, so we sat and waited. The car looked like one most older people might drive. I didn't think anything of it until I noticed it was driving very slowly. I began to feel uneasy as we waited for this car to pass, and it felt like it took forever. Since the bright lights were on, we could see the car and driver very well. To our surprise, it was an old lady. She had short white curly hair and very pale skin. She must have been in her 80s. The woman kept both of her hands on the steering wheel. What the hell was an old lady doing this far out of town at 2 in the morning by herself? She was facing forward and stopped her car in front of us before slowly turning her head to face us. This was the point where we froze. The woman's eyes were completely black. Then, just as slowly as before, she turned her head forward. She slowly turned right and drove off into the darkness to the furthest part of the park. I don't remember her headlights being on. We both got spooked and quickly left the park. I was confused by the whole situation. I have so many questions, but I'd rather not ask them. We lived in New Mexico, and we always hear stories of aliens and skinwalkers, but I don't know what that was. Perhaps it was a demon or even a devil. It has been 10 years since that happened, and I still think about it very often. A few months later, we drove out to the dirt roads to get away for a little bit. The sun was just setting. I knew we should have gone home as soon as it got dark, but I decided that we would park and relax. That's when we saw a humanoid figure that was dirty, had very long legs, and it ran on all fours. It ran to the field next to us, which I think was an alfalfa field, and vanished within seconds. I'm aware of many stories in New Mexico about skinwalkers, but I really never paid attention or believed in them. I figured it was a native superstition or the stuff you tell kids to make them stay in at night or give them a good scare. We mentioned what we saw a couple of times to some friends, and they too have stories about seeing weird things out by the dirt roads. We haven't been out driving like that in a while. However, it just seems dangerous. We are unsure if what we saw was a skinwalker or something else completely, but we've kept ourselves away from the state parks and the dirt roads, for the most part anyway. Some background information. I really love the summertime. I love hiking, being outdoors, and hanging with friends while camping and such. So during the summer of 2005, I was already starting to plan a little overnight camping trip in a national forest a couple of towns away from where I live. It is also important to mention that I do these types of things solo, and that this was my first time going with that specific national forest. I guess I was ultimately unprepared with this trip because while getting there, I had realized that I forgot to bring a ground cover for my tent, since I didn't use a tent with a built-in ground cover at the time. I also forgot some other small things, however. I was already more than halfway to the national forest, so I said F it, and kept going anyways, since it was just going to be an overnighter. Things got worse when there was also a lot of traffic on the highway, throwing me a couple of hours off schedule. On my way there, I kept on glancing at the sky and looking at the sunset. Crap, I thought. It was already getting dark out. After 20 minutes of driving from the exit, I got to the mountains and there was nothing but trees on either side of the road. So not having been there before, I thought that I was already in the park. There was a moment I pondered how strange it was that there were no signs at the entrance. But already behind schedule and needing to set up camp, the thought disappeared as quickly as it came from my mind. After around 20 more minutes of driving through pure forest, and the road turned to gravel, I thought to myself, this has to be some sort of camping area, right? Looking back, I should have turned around there, but I was exhausted and a little stubborn by that point, so I was still dead set on finding some spot to camp. I finally settled on parking near a clearing on a dirt path instead of camp there. When I got out of my truck, things seemed fairly normal. The only thing that seemed out of place at the time, that there was no other sounds except for the crickets and the sounds of me setting up camp. No wind, no frogs, owls, not even the howl of a wolf, just the crickets and myself. It was already getting late by that point. It was a little past 9, so I had dinner, sat around the campfire for a little bit, and then crashed in my tent. I awoke at 11:15. I thought I had woken up because my back was stiff and due to me sleeping on the bare ground, but my back seemed fine. I came to the conclusion that I had woken myself up randomly, and so I tried to go back to bed. Soon after closing my eyes again, I heard what sounded like a deep, raspy not far in the distance. That was presumably what had woken me up initially. I sat up immediately, Now, what in the hell was that? I murmured to myself, since this didn't seem like the howl or growl of any animals I knew about. I went back to my sleeping bag, desperately thinking to myself of a logical explanation as to what made that sound. Maybe it was an owl being killed by a whip or something, was what I concluded. After around 2 minutes of trying to fall back asleep, I was immediately jolted straight awake by that same shrieking sound right next to the wall of my tent. Pure shock, I immediately jolted up, bust out the front of my tent, and ran straight in the opposite direction of what I heard. I didn't look back. I also was unable to catch a glimpse of what it was. I was running for a couple of seconds when I slipped down a hill and tumbled for a couple of seconds until I stopped. I tried to keep as still as possible. Maybe the thing didn't see me fall, I thought. I didn't want to give away where I was. I listened closely, but there was no sound. I waited a little longer. Still nothing. I peeked over the hill, trying to see as much of my campsite as I could in the pitch darkness. I didn't see any of it. While doing this, I noticed how there were no crickets chirping anymore. Pure silence. I didn't hear any leaves crunching either. To me, it seemed to be all clear that I could make a beeline for my tent, grab my pack, which had some miscellaneous stuff in my wallet in it, but most importantly my keys, and hightail it out of there. I knew I had to make this quick, so I tried to get to my car as quickly as possible while making the least amount of sound. I eventually got my keys from my bag, at which point I went over to the car, unlocked it, and turned the car on. Once I did this, I started to floor it out of there. I knew I shouldn't have done what I was going to do next, but I took one last look back at the tent. Crouching down, right beside the tent was the thing. Even in the darkness, I could make out its features. Its eyes were completely black. Its body was covered with short white hair, and the overall body structure was barely that of a human. I knew it saw me because I saw it. The creature let out a screech that I'm all too familiar with now. I punched the gas pedal on my car and didn't stop until I got to a hotel a good distance away from the neck of the forest. I must have looked like a backwoods insane person or something when I came into the lobby all dirty in my pajamas. But I still got a room and immediately collapsed into the bed, exhausted. I had a nightmare that night where I was looking at myself in the third person, sleeping in my motel room, and the creature appeared at my window slowly before letting out a horrific screech. I jolted awake to the sound of nothing but my own heavy breathing and the crickets outside. I might be paranoid, but I'm fairly certain that at one point, that night, I heard the same screeching again, off in the distance. This happened to me a year ago on a camping trip with my dad in late July or early August. It was a weekend trip and we were the only ones at the campground. For privacy purposes, I will not state the name of the park we were camping at, but I will say that it was in the state of Indiana. Anyway, I was awoken with a start one night in my tent. Checking the time on my phone, it was around 3:30 a.m. I was hesitant at first to get out of the tent, but my bladder was screaming, which forced me to get out of the tent. The sounds of the forest I would have had any other time found comforting, but this time, for whatever reason, they seemed to unnerve me. About 50 yards away, and uphill, was a porta potty, and since I'm a girl, I can't just pee in the woods, so I grabbed the headlamp which my mom had loaned me, turned it on, and headed to the porta potty. I was talking to myself in an attempt to calm my nerves, mostly because I was complaining about my bladder, and how dim the headlamp was. The light was so faint that it only illuminated 5 feet in front of me, so I ended up relying on the light of the moon to guide me. I made it to the porta potty without incident, relieved my bladder, and then headed back to the tent. Once I was around halfway there, it struck me. The forest was now silent, eerily silent. My mind began imagining the horrors of what was lurking in the woods. skinwalkers, wendigos, Bigfoots, who were just waiting for me to get in range so they could snatch me up and make me their dinner. With the speed of an Olympic runner, I sprinted the last 20 yards back to camp faster than anyone's ever seen. The headlamp died almost as I got there. Upon arriving at camp and catching my breath, I got the sensation I was being watched. I turned to face the tree line that bordered the lake and saw a pair of large yellow golden eyes. My tent is very close to this tree line, so whatever this thing was less than 15 feet away. Frozen in fear, I stared back at the eyes. Then my headlamp went out, but the eyes of this creature were still glowing. I am a rational person, so I first figured it was a coyote or a large stray dog, and my headlamp's light was just reflecting off the eyes, giving the illusion that they were glowing. So when my headlamp went out, I expected the eyes to do the same. However, they did not. They were indeed glowing a golden yellow. Terrified, I took a few steps back and lost my balance, falling onto my butt. The eyes got closer, and the moonlight shone on this monstrosity of a creature, revealing a silhouette that in no way matched the size of a coyote or a dog. It was far larger and appeared to be on its hind legs. If I had to guess, the creature stood taller than 6 feet and had a hunched-over body. It had the head of a dog. If I had to guess, it looked like the head shape of a husky or a wolf dog. Now, I know most people, when they talk about encountering dogmen, they mention a strong feeling of malevolence coming from the creature. For some reason, I think I felt the opposite. The eyes of the creature did not seem to hold any sort of malice or seemingly intent to harm me. Rather, I got the sense it was curious, or at the very least confused. After engaging in a staring contest with this creature, which probably lasted just about a minute, but felt like forever, the creature got back to all fours and retreated into the forest. But it made no sound as it did so. Was it Dogman or a werewolf or whatever you want to call it? I don't know. I know it wasn't a bear. We don't have grizzlies in Indiana, and black bears aren't all that common. I'm honestly at a loss as to what this creature was. It left no tracks behind in the muddy banks of the lake. If any of you know what it could be, please comment down below letting me know. I was backpacking in Arkansas, the Eagle Rock Loop in the Washita National Forest. There's a section of the trail that goes through an area called the Albert Pike Recreation Area. In June of 2010, a flash flood killed 20 people, including men, women, and children. There's a ton of stories online about this event if you want to look it up. So I start my trip at Little Missouri Falls, going counterclockwise. It's 26 miles with some pretty good climbs. You can find a map of the loop on Google Images. So I hiked a fairly long day. If you Google Eagle Rock Loop map, you will find a basic sketch map, not the topo map, just one of the basic ones with the labels of the trails, mountains, and water crossings on Pinterest. At the bottom of the map, there is a single water drop with a yellow circle around it. This just means it's always a wet crossing. There are several yellow circled water drops. The single one at the very bottom right next to the Biles Branch Trail. That is exactly where I was camped, so anyone can go there if you want to look it up and see what I'm talking about. So, that is the Little Missouri River. The water is flowing away from Albert Pike. I'm maybe 4 to 5 miles downstream from where the flash flood occurred. I don't know if this is significant or not to my story, but I'm not ruling it out either. I set up camp at about 4 p.m. of the day. This was November of last year. Fairly cold nights. It was about 26 degrees the night before. I was expecting another cold night in the high 20s. Not a lot of movement around there that night when it was cold. Most animals hunker down. I use a tarp where both ends are open. I have an inflatable sleeping pad, in my 35-degree sleeping bag. Now, I'm set up on completely level ground. On my pad, on the tarp inside my sleeping bag, I quickly fall asleep around 10 p.m. after sitting around the fire. Everything is normal all evening, and all night for the most part. Now, do you know when you're asleep and you fall in your dream? You get that sensation like you're falling in real life when you tense up and always wake up on impact. Okay, well, I was asleep and I get the sensation sort of where I feel like I'm being dragged out of my tarp by my feet. Except it wasn't by my feet.
Got
I
the
was being pulled by the sleeping bag.
cord.
Like my whole pad was
There,
suddenly being dragged out quickly.
I mounted it to the side of the window frame.
Keep in mind, it was
That way you can reach all your plugs easy.
high 20s at this point.
You don't have to have no ladder or nothing.
35-degree
Plug it up or turn it on or
I'm
off.
inside my bag
Turn
all
the whole
way,
thing off or whatever you
stopped
want
by a
to.
shock cord.
Got
I'm
the air
completely inside
conditioner
my
hooked
bag,
into it.
covered to stay warm.
Okay.
Now,
So you can turn it
I'm
on
wide
and
awake
you
and
use it,
listening
it'll be
for
on.
any movement.
I just cleaned all
Everything
of it
is still
too.
quiet, except
Cleaned
for the
around the
river
bottom
next
of
to
that
me,
windowsill and
obviously.
cleaned all that shit out.
That is the only sound I
On
can
the bottom
hear.
of it.
I didn't peek out my head. I just laid
I
there
think
awake and
want to
listening.
try to
I
find a
sat
couple
there for a good 15 minutes
AAA
listening for any
batteries
sound outside the river.
that we might have.
I
Let's
never
see.
heard anything.
I put you
Granted,
in
the
some
river's pretty
flashlights
loud
in the
being right
house,
there, but there was no movement around my camp at all.
and this one.
So I chalked it up to having that falling sensation when you dream. I figured I must have been dreaming about something, and it made me feel like I fell or something.
You got
I
the light
went to
on
sleep
or
for 30
the
or 45 minutes longer, still keeping my ears open, but figuring I was probably just dreaming. So for the most part, I just shrugged it off and put my mind off of it, and got back to sleep. Morning comes, and I get up and put my shoes on and roll out of bed. I head straight over to the fire to pit it and stoke at the fire for first thing because it's definitely cold outside at 6:30 a.m. this morning. I turn back towards my tarp and head over to get my food hanging close by. That's when I noticed it, and I froze. My pad and sleeping bag at the foot end are sticking out from under my tarp, by a good foot and a half at least. I can think about how now, as I felt being dragged out from under my tarp the night before, staring at how my bed is from under the tarp. I slowly approach the tarp and look for any sort of footprint. The problem is I don't even see my own because the ground is so compact around there. I double check and I'm not in any sort of slope at all. The ground is completely flat. I really have no idea how this happened, and I know I was startled awake by that sensation swiftly sliding down the hill towards my feet. My pad with me in it was being dragged out. I quickly had breakfast, packed up and headed out. I was supposed to spend one more night on the trail, but the longer I hiked, the more I thought that what would happen the next night. These thoughts running in my head the entire day as I walked. Could it have been another person? I didn't hear anything. Why would anyone do that to anyone else? How could I have slid down so far? Maybe it was an animal. It couldn't have been. There were no punctures in my mattress, and there were no footprints anywhere. Did I just slide throughout the night with restless sleep? It doesn't make any sense. I normally sleep on a slight incline, and I've never slid outside of the tarp before. Was this paranormal? I'm not far from Robert Pike. Could this been some sort of ghost trying to save me from the flash flood horror that I was reliving over and over? All day long, the same things were running through my head. I ended up hiking to my car and sleeping in there that night. The Athens Big Ford Trail was very tough going up over 6 mountains. It was almost dark after I descended the last one. I hiked the last 3 or so miles by a headlamp in the dark. I wasn't keen on sleeping on the trail another night after that. Truth is, I've been on that trail a ton, and will for sure go back. I've been all over Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, New Mexico, and Colorado. Around 750 miles and countless nights spent in the woods all over the place. I almost exclusively hike solo. I never carry a gun or bear spray.
Never.
I don't carry a SAT phone or GPS transponder.
No, no.
That is the only weird and unexplainable thing that has ever happened to me regarding camping, backpacking, and the outdoors. I went to a summer camp when I was younger, and every summer at the camp, there was a 4-way long camping trip in the nearby national park. I decided to go on it, and our first day, we canoed for almost 7 hours into what seemed to be the middle of nowhere. It was a couple hours before dark when we decided to make camp, and we boarded to a tiny bay and disembarked. One of the other kids in our group, there were about 10 of us campers and 4 counselors, immediately decided to head into the woods to collect some firewood, while the rest of us set up the sights. Not 2 minutes later, he came sprinting back, shouting that he found a few people in the woods and huts and teepees.
I'm gonna put
I
this
remember laughing
control
along with everyone else. He
right
was
there
sort of a
in
goofy
the
guy,
windsill.
so we thought he was full of shit. Until we noticed how serious he still
When I
was,
turn it on,
so
you
most
see
of
it
us
by
decided to
chance. It may
investigate.
program itself.
We
It
slowly
has
made our
that
way through
built-in
the dense forest.
Mm-hmm.
In less than
sensors
200
at mine.
feet from the campsite was a clearing with people milling about.
Yeah, Gary said that.
Set
Well,
in
he
the
said they
clearing
got
were actual teepees,
got it
along with a
on
few
ours
huts made of
in
branches.
the living room, but they hadn't got it
At
in
the back of the clearing was a
Oh,
bunch of
yeah.
pickup trucks, and
the
behind them
extender.
was a dirt track
Somehow
leading
that's not
away.
hooked, or that's not
And
right.
not 15 feet in front of us, as
You
we
shouldn't
emerged from the
have
woods,
to have
was a
that
huge
reason
table
that cable.
with probably 40 people sitting at
What
it.
is it gonna?
That's
do?
just the Marriott to begin with. And he didn't actually
And
marry
we
it.
stood back.
They didn't take
Then this
time.
small, older woman with a feather in her hair
Something wasn't
stood
done
up.
right.
She smiled and offered us some food. Our head trip counselor politely declined, then asked if it was okay if we were camping nearby. She said it wouldn't be a problem, and already the other people were getting back after their huge meal. She sat down, and we turned and headed back to the shore of the lake. We were all pretty stunned that we were going to be staying the night a few steps away from a lot of random strangers in the woods. But the counselor said it would be fine and finished setting up the camp. We all turned in pretty early, though. Now that I'm even older than those counselors were, I don't think I would have had the balls to stay there through the night. The next morning, we got up really early, and we were getting ready to leave. Suddenly, a voice called out from the woods. The old woman from the table stepped
What?
out and asked if any of us had seen her husband. Now, none of us knew who her husband was or what he looked like, and considering we had interacted with these people for less than a minute, it was pretty weird that she would come over and ask about him. Also, I swear this is total truth. She was holding a huge knife. Remember, we were all very still, but one of the counselors said we hadn't seen him. She turned and left, and we hauled ass out of there. It wasn't until we got to the next lake that the counselor and my canoe relaxed and acknowledged and fucked up I had been. As if it wasn't enough, on the last night of the trip, I woke up in the pitch black middle of the night and stepped out of the tent. All 10 of us kids shared to go pee. When I was younger, I woke up to pee a lot, but it was the first time on this particular trip. As I started peeing, I heard rustling and noises, and then a short howl. We were camped on the side of a very narrow inlet and extended far back from the main lake, and in the darkness on the side of the inlet you could see glowing eyes. I have almost never been scared, but I bravely finished peeing and slowly, yes slowly, went back into my tent. I'm not religious at all, but that was one and only time that I felt legitimately prayed for those wolves that they didn't come over the water or around us. Sorry for the length of the story. Thanks for watching this video. Much appreciated, guys. If you enjoyed these stories, be sure to hit that thumbs up button, as it really does help me a lot. If you're new to the swamp, why not subscribe and hit those notification buttons to never miss a video. I upload videos almost every single day on all things creepy and anomalous. If you have a story that you'd like to share on a future video, if you have a story that you'd like to share on the channel, be sure to send it in to the email or the website that is in the description down below. On screen now you will see some cool things that you can click on, such as this Missing 411/Park Ranger series called I Know Why People Are Going Missing in the Woods. It's almost 2 hours long, and part 3 is coming soon, so you don't want to miss this thrilling, creepy story.
Well, get us a couple of recliners, buddy. Changing the sheets now. Shit. Oh, motherfucker.
Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin. This is Life, Liberty, and Levin. Great guest again, Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli. Good to be with you. Good to be with you. You were Attorney General of Virginia. You had a big landmark case. You won your Obamacare challenge, and it got all screwed up in the Supreme Court. You're well known, not just in conservative circles and legal circles. You have a great legal mind. I've known you for a very, very long time, and I thought it was very important to have you here. So I want to thank you to go through. Good to be with you. Well, there's a lot going on, and so we need to work our way through this. All right, let's go back to the report. This report that came out, the Mueller report, 2 sections. One section was legal, no collusion. Right. It's kind of long. No collusion's 2 words last time I checked. Right. It goes on and on and on. Then there's another section, which is highly political, verbose, and reads completely differently, doesn't it? Yeah, it doesn't read like a prosecutor wrote it. And that's the so-called obstruction section, right? Now, a couple of questions on this obstruction issue. One of the individuals who was involved in writing this report was the number 2 guy, Andrew Weissman. He was involved in the prosecution of Arthur Andersen related to Enron. Arthur Andersen, as a result, went out of business. 80,000 people lost their jobs. And that was focused on obstruction of justice, an expanded definition of obstruction of justice. The statute, as the Supreme Court would later tell us, has really 2 important elements. You need mens rea. You need to know what you're doing. It's a specific intent crime. So you need to have knowledge. Right, to have the specific intent. To have the specific. That's right. So you need to have knowledge that you have a criminal motive, right? A corrupt purpose. Right. And so they were reversed, Mr. Weissman and the government. But Arthur Andersen already went out of business. 80,000 people lost their jobs. It was a 9-0 decision. It was 12 pages long. If you take the cover page out and the 2 sentences on the last page and the summary of the facts out, it was a 5 or 6 page opinion. It was like that. Right. When you read this volume 2 on obstruction, it reads like Weissman wrote it. He's expanded. It's definitely got a very expansive view of obstruction. Right. Let me ask you this question. If you're a prosecutor, and Mueller believed, even though the Department of Justice's position was you can't indict a sitting president, he told the Attorney General Barr, it's not the reason they didn't bring charges under obstruction. They didn't have an obstruction case. Right. That's right. Because that didn't hold them back, did it? No, it didn't. And it's interesting when you listen to some people in mainstream media, they focus on language in there that talks about the Department of Justice, bipartisan departments of justice who concluded you can't indict a sitting president. So they focus on that. But Mueller also said in that volume 2 that that didn't hold them back, that what they were saying was without regard to that policy of the Department of Justice, they didn't have a case to make. And that's what a prosecutor does. They decide to prosecute or not. Here they went beyond that, as we've already discussed. But clearly on that question, they knew they didn't have a prosecution to go forward with. So when we hear Hillary Clinton, or we hear others who probably haven't read this, they certainly didn't read the Supreme Court decision in 2005 that Weissman was involved in. We hear legal analysts, quote unquote, these titles that they get. They don't know the law, do they? No, frequently. And it's very true. And if Mueller wanted to bring a case, he said he would have brought a case. Now, would have been challenged on a number of fronts. He would have brought a case. But if he had brought the case, he would have lost, and he would have lost badly because the 2 elements. Well, he knows that. Yeah, and that's why they didn't bring the case. So why did he write the volume 2 of the report? Well, the volume 2 goes, like you said, goes beyond a legal analysis. That is not what I read there. I read a lot more political results into what they're writing. I think you could say he's writing for Congress, baiting Congress into maybe impeachment proceedings, but with so many facts laid out, because it is long, the whole thing being almost 450 pages, we know a lot now, and there just isn't anything there that comes anywhere close to a criminal standard. So if Congress wants to proceed, they're going to have to do it on the political basis that Mueller put in the second part of the report. And it is political, just like you said. And you know, it's interesting, the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, and the Office of Legal Counsel, which is filled with civil servants, and other legal offices at the Department of Justice looked at Volume 2.
Right.
They looked at the information the prosecutor presented, and they said, there's no case here.
Right.
There's no case here based on what the Supreme Court has said, based on law, and they were said to have been basically sellouts. So we move into the political. Volume 2 was written for the political. Let's see if you agree with me. What did the prosecutor's office know when they were writing Volume 2? They knew that the Democrats took the House of Representatives. What else did they know? They knew that nominee Barr had told the Senate Judiciary Committee during his confirmation hearings that I'm going to try and release as much of this as I can.
Right.
6E grand jury, I'll hold back. Classified, you know, so forth, I'll hold back. He wasn't required to turn over anything. But he says, look, I'm going to try and turn over as much as I can. So the prosecutor's office knew, 1, the Democrats control the House. 2, the report's going to be released.
Right.
Volume 2 has very little redacted information in there.
Almost none.
Almost none.
Right.
So who are they writing it for? They weren't writing it for the Department of Justice, because they weren't going to do anything.
Right.
They're writing it for the media, the Democrat chairman of these committees, and they're running wild with it, politically. And that's what I want to get to with you. You have all these subpoenas being thrown out there. Nadler pushed out, how many?
81.
81.
Like, that's already done. That's pre-Mueller report.
Pre-Mueller, he puts out 81.
No explanation for what they're for.
No explanation. Family members,
Right.
business associates, homeless people. I don't know. There's just 81 out there. He puts all kinds of documents he wants.
Right.
Then we have Elijah Cummings on this House Oversight and Reform Committee. He's going after the president's taxes, going after the president's accountant, and not just that. They want all notes and all communications and everything between the president when he was a private citizen, his family members, and we have another committee headed by Maxine Waters, the Financial Services or whatever they call committee. They want all the president's bank account information, so they're sitting there coordinating.
Of course.
To do what?
Well, personal destruction.
Personal destruction.
Yeah, that's what that's about.
Under our Constitution, Article 1, is that a legitimate role for the United States Congress?
Of course not. They can issue subpoenas for legislative purposes and oversight purposes. And Nadler started this whole ball rolling with his 81 subpoenas. None of the folks who got those subpoenas were given either of those reasons. They were very generic. And people have already started saying, I'm not turning anything over to you. I'm not coming. They're refusing. And on the record so far, the public record so far, they would win those contests.
Legal people challenging.
Yes. There's no basis for Congress to issue these yet. And Nadler isn't willing to say we're pursuing impeachment or considering impeachment. He's not saying that. That's quite a red line to step over. That both, even Pelosi and Hoyer, their majority leader, have been trying to talk their people down from. They are unwilling to absorb the political cost of crossing that line, the chairmen are. And so they don't have a basis to issue these subpoenas. And if you're on the president's team, one of the things that's gotten very little coverage about the Mueller report is, you mentioned the redactions. They didn't claim executive privilege one single time.
President.
That's right. You remember the Clinton impeachment process. Setting the politics aside, they used executive privilege all over.
Creative privileges. We never heard of it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. They were creating brand new, fresh ones. And they didn't refuse providing any witnesses. The president didn't sit down to be interviewed. He did answer written questions, which are in the report, unredacted, and read very straightforwardly, very honestly, and therefore they've gotten no coverage. With Mueller during the investigation, and of course we know how the president feels about this investigation. Now we know even more, not just that it was a witch hunt from his perspective, but that it undermined the legitimacy of his presidency in some people's eyes, and he has a great concern about that. And yet, they turned over 1 million documents. They made everybody in the White House available, though the president was only available in writing as opposed to sitting down. And so now you've got Congress coming in, and the president is saying, no. We cooperated 100%, more than anybody else in our lifetimes. Nixon didn't cooperate like this. Clinton didn't cooperate like this in similar circumstances. But
Our man
Trump
Reagan
did.
didn't either.
No, he didn't.
Iran-Contra, he
No, that's
asserted
right.
privileges, and by the way, maybe they should have.
Right.
But here's the thing. There you have the president dealing with his own administration. The special counsel, after all, is an
Right.
inferior,
That's right.
that's the theory anyway, inferior employee of the executive branch. Now you have a separation of powers issue.
Right.
Now's the time where you can assert privilege. So Nadler says, too late, you didn't assert it during the other investigation. Is Nadler a constitutional illiterate? I mean, now we're talking about separation of powers.
Right.
Doesn't the president have an obligation to do this to protect the office of the presidency so that future Congresses aren't demanding personal financial information, tax returns, bank information? The president doesn't report to the House of Representatives. That's not who he represents. He represents the American people.
That's right. And that's an excellent point. So everybody personalizes, and it's human nature, they personalize the presidency. The presidency is Donald Trump right now. Before it was Barack Obama. But the presidency is its own office. It has its own article in the Constitution, Article 2. And in addition to protecting himself, the president also has an obligation to protect the presidency. And establishing precedents of ceding ground to the Article 1 branch is something that all of his successors would have to live with.
If Congress gets away with this, what's to stop them from subpoenaing the Chief Justice's bank records, or subpoenaing the Chief Justice's tax returns, or anybody they don't like, or for that matter, any citizen that they're focused on and trying to harass? Their bank accounts, their tax returns, whatever. I have to believe if this ever gets to the Supreme Court, those gentlemen and ladies better be thinking about it,
Right.
because there may be some Congresses that are hostile to them. I want to pursue this with you in a moment further. Before we do, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, you can join me on Levin TV, Levin TV, almost every weeknight. Just go to blazetv.com/mark to sign up, blazetv.com/mark, or give us a call, 844-LEVIN-TV, 844-LEVIN-TV. We'll be right back. Ken Cuccinelli. It's pretty obvious Mueller knew relatively early on in his investigation that there was no collusion, no collaboration, no conspiracy. So why didn't he tell the American people?
Well, one of the, perhaps the most political aspect of this report is the fact that it didn't come 7 months earlier. If it comes 7 months earlier, a different party might still be in control of the House of Representatives. And let's be clear about that. And they were more or less done with their information gathering that early. It was a question of wrapping it up. And like you said, there was no evidence of collusion really at any point. And we saw information come out slowly in indictments, and witnesses would talk and so forth. And there was never anything, as someone who managed a team of prosecutors in the Attorney General's office, there was never anything that pointed to actual intentional cooperation, knowing cooperation between any American. We've all focused on the Trump campaign, but this report noted that no American that they identified cooperated with the Russians, knowing they were cooperating with the
But
Russians.
you were an attorney general. You're sitting there and you're watching this hysterical media, 24/7. People connecting dots that don't even exist.
That don't exist, right?
About collusion, tearing down a presidency, burdening a president. And they wanted to interview him, knowing full well there was no collusion. And the conclusion that I come up with as a former chief of staff to an attorney general, maybe as a former attorney general, is they were out to get him because there was no reason to talk to him.
Yeah, game of gotcha.
So you agree?
I do agree. And I thought that it was entirely appropriate and smart for the president not to sit down with this investigation. And look, you know, a couple minutes earlier, I pointed out how they cooperated in every way. They gave him documents. Everybody in the White House was available, but the president didn't sit down and wasn't directly interviewed, nor should he have been under these circumstances.
And the reason they didn't issue a subpoena, you need some kind of predicate when you're going to demand
You
that
do.
the president come in front
That's
of it.
right.
But they didn't have one because there was no collusion, wasn't there?
No, and when they, of course, they included the written answers the president gave to their questions, which has gotten zero coverage because they were so straightforward and frankly logical to anybody who goes through and reads them all, there's nothing to punch holes in. And they said in the introduction, we wanted to sit down with them. We tried for a year to get an interview, but really when we gathered all of our other information, we didn't feel like we needed to do that anymore, that it wasn't worth the hassle. And so they more or less conceded that they could come to all of their conclusions. They had more than enough information to draw what conclusions they did draw. And if you're the president, there's nowhere to go but down with that interview. Why do it?
If you're the prosecutor, you would lose if you press the case.
Correct.
Because you would be tested in front of a very skeptical court.
You don't have a basis to argue to the judge.
Let's circle back to Don McGahn, President's counsel. Extraordinary. The president allows him to testify to the prosecutors, not in front of the grand jury, by the way, to the prosecutors, which means the White House knew that none of this would be redacted. I mean, it's not 6C grand jury interview.
No, it's not.
30 hours. That's a lot of time.
That is a lot of time.
How much in the report of that testimony is there?
Less than a page.
Less than a page. Well, what
Maybe
happened?
2 paragraphs.
What happened all those 30 hours?
Apparently nothing very interesting.
Well, isn't that interesting?
Well, and it's easy to throw these numbers out.
Yeah.
For people who aren't lawyers, who don't do depositions, an 8-hour deposition
That's
is
a long
marathon.
Yes.
It is a marathon. And when you have a point at the heart of why you're interviewing this deponent, you come at it 20 different ways in 8 hours. And they were with him for 30 hours, and all we see is the exchange about the president wanted to fire the special counsel, Don McGahn didn't want the special counsel fired, and that's pretty much it. And of course, the president didn't fire him, so we know how that argument turned out.
Well,
that's all that's in there.
Let's break this up. This is very important. 30 hours, we get a couple sentences, right? In a report, which is really not legal.
Oh, what the fuck?
I'm not Judge Noble.
Huh?
What is such a name?
So, how the fuck did we get on Netflix?
Ah, yeah, the other remote.
What'd you do, hit it?
I must have one and leaned over. Shit happens.
What's really happening now, because it ain't going to Roku. What is that?
Getting the resetting password for
Go in there and do it,
Netflix.
so it don't.
I am. I just got to get the.
You got the controller, didn't you?
Sweet, fluffy King's Hawaiian buns pair well with almost every meat Arby's serves. To prove it, we make...
Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin. This is Life, Liberty, and Levin. Great guest again, Attorney General.
It is a marathon. And when you have a point at the heart of why you're interviewing this deponent, you come at it 20 different ways in 8 hours. And they were with him for 30 hours, and all we see is the exchange about the president wanted to fire the special counsel, Don McGahn didn't want the special counsel fired, and that's pretty much it. And of course, the president didn't fire him, so we know how that argument turned out.
Well,
that's all that's in there.
Let's break this up. This is very important. 30 hours, we get a couple sentences, right? In a report, which is really not legal, volume 2, where they're writing,
Right, none of those restrictions, and it's 400
no restrictions, no grand jury, and there they only give us a couple sentences.
Right.
You and I know, and you kind of pointed this, you're aggressive prosecutors, you have the president's counsel, that's a gift that you can't even dream about.
Right.
You know damn well they asked him about obstruction 100 different ways.
Right.
You know they came at him hard about it.
Right.
And that's the best they have, is that he asked McGahn to fire Mueller. He says that. The president says, I never said that. And my point, too, is multifold. Number one, I bet they videotaped this.
I would have.
I would have.
I would have, for sure.
I bet there's a videotape of this. I would love to see the rest of this interview. And I think it can only help the President of the United States. Because these prosecutors took what they thought was the best they could cherry pick
Right.
and put it in volume 2. Okay, what about the other 29 hours and 59 minutes?
That's
What
right.
else took place there? That's number one. Number two is this. The president could have fired Mueller anytime he wanted to. There's nothing that says he has to ask his counsel to fire
No, the White House
Mueller.
counsel is not in the chain of command. The White House counsel is an advisor to the presidency. That's it. And the president never made any attempt to actually fire the special counsel. They obviously argued about it, or assuming that there's some accuracy in there, they argued about it. But good lawyers don't tell clients what they want to hear. Good lawyers evaluate a question and tell their client, here are your options, and here's what I suggest you do. And they can argue about it. I've argued with my client,
Right.
and some of those arguments they've taken my advice, others they haven't. Those they regretted not taking my advice. But the president, lawyers advise, clients decide. The president clearly, by not doing it, decided not to fire Mueller because there was, as you said, Mark, there was never any impediment to him doing that, ever.
So this idea that McGahn saved the president, that's just another phony pseudo argument. We'll be right back.
Live from America's News headquarters, I'm Aisha Hasni. A shooting at a cookout in Baltimore leaves one person dead and 7 others injured. Police say a gunman fired into the crowd and appeared to be, quote, extremely targeted. Cops also say there may have been a second gunman or somebody firing back at the first shooter who fled on foot. It happened near a church, but the city's acting mayor says the church was not the target. A college student is among the dead following a crane collapse Saturday in Seattle. Seattle Pacific University officials say freshman Sarah Wong was one of 4 people killed. 3 others were also injured. She was in a car that was crushed by the crane as it fell from a building under construction at Google's new Seattle campus. I'm Aisha Hasni. Now back to Life, Liberty, and Levin.
Ken Cuccinelli. So we have committees in the House that are obviously coordinating, right, the issuance of their subpoenas, their press releases, their public propaganda. They have a media that basically writes down every word they say and then regurgitates it and then pushes them to do more. Here's how I'm looking at this. The Democrats in the House of Representatives are blackmailing this president. Now, what do I mean by that? They are telling him, either you give us your bank records, either you give us your tax returns, either you give us whatever we demand, or we're going to impeach you. And if you don't, we're going to impeach you. What they're basically saying to him is, we want you to give us the weapons by which we can destroy you.
Right.
And if you don't allow us to destroy you, we're going to destroy you anyway.
For that.
For that. Right. Have you ever seen anything like this?
No. We've never seen anything like this. And even in the Clinton impeachment, which politically was a mistake for the Republicans.
But he committed crimes.
Right. Oh, yeah. Lying under oath on video, et cetera, and while president.
And in front of a federal judge.
That's true. All of those things correct, and yet you didn't have this kind of orchestrated, broad scale, the whole, they're turning over 3 committees to this effort, basically. And I just have never seen anything like it. Also, of course, it's in the first term of the president. And that's actually an important distinction that even Steny Hoyer made. In the case of Bill Clinton, they were in the second term. There was no accountability. This couldn't be tried in public, if you will, with the American people. Well, this president's running for re-election next year. And I think he's perfectly happy to do battle on these issues in the public arena. What he's not going to concede to do, as he's already said and demonstrated, is he's not going to play their game their way in the House of Representatives. And they don't have the authority, because of the separation of powers, to compel him to do it. So why should he? We'll see this played out, I think, over the next year and a half. But my view of the media perspective on this is that you've got the so-called Acela corridor, the New York-Washington corridor of people who get all worked up into a lather about a lot of this stuff that ordinary Americans don't care a lick about. There's no collusion. There's no obstruction. Let's move on to make this country even better than it is. And why are you people wasting your time with all this? I think that's the average American's view. It's by and large my view, particularly when you had as much cooperation by the president and the White House with the Mueller investigation, which they thought very ill of anyway in the first place.
Let me try this on you. The chairman of this House Oversight and Reform Committee, Elijah Cummings, is from Baltimore.
Right.
Heavy blue, heavy Democrat.
Very safe seat for him.
Safe seat. No Republican could ever win that.
Right. Same with Nadler and Waters.
And again, Nadler, another one, New York City. Safe seat, heavy blue, no Republicans going to take it. Waters, L.A.
Right.
Same thing. Pelosi, San Francisco, same.
Yeah.
We have a handful of Democrats that run the House of Representatives. They have the caucus, they have them, but a handful that have the iron fist.
Right.
They come out of these very specific areas of the country that basically represent 90 miles on one end of the country, maybe 120 miles on the other end of the country. Then with a big country in between. All those red places and purple places.
Right.
We have a handful of members of the House of Representatives who are trying to take down the President of the United States because he's of a different party, he's of a different philosophy. And let me suggest this to you. If they succeed, I don't think they will, if they succeed, it's the greatest act of voter suppression in American history. Over 63 million people voted for this president.
Right.
And what these handful of radical Democrats are saying is, too bad.
Right.
It's also the greatest disenfranchisement
Yeah, that's what I would describe.
in the history of the country. Over 63 million people are being told, oh, that vote you took in 2016, that doesn't matter. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that a lot of those 63 million people are frankly pretty ticked off about this attempt because that is what they're trying to do. It's interesting that this past week Hillary Clinton resurfaces with an op-ed in the Washington Post. I will say I agreed with one thing she said in there. She started out by saying, I may not be the best messenger to talk about this subject. You think? And it's sour grapes. Look, I lost an election for governor.
Tiny, 2.5%.
2.5% here in Virginia, and while I engaged on issues, whether on Fourth Amendment issues, on a number of issues in Virginia, I never directly engaged with Terry McAuliffe, who was the guy who won that race, because I think, as frankly presidents who have gone out of office have behaved similarly, that kind of personal engagement, the doing battle like she did this week, it lowers your credibility. You sound like a sore loser because, frankly, you are a sore loser, and she is among the sorest of sore losers. And it demonstrates the desperation of even what she's arguing for. And all she did was try to lay out a slow walk to impeachment. That's all. And what I thought was most interesting when I got to the end of it is there was no statement like, and we need to show nobody's above the law because no Clinton is ever going to write that.
That's hilarious. We'll be right back. Ken Cuccinelli, the truth is there was interference with the election, really by two entities, the Russians
Right.
and the Obama administration.
That's right.
And what's interesting in this 400-page, $35 million report, there's nothing about the interference in the election by the Obama administration. The entire senior level of the FBI wiped out itself. They're either under criminal investigation or on Inspector General investigation. Right. They were leakers. They were colluders. You took this dossier paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC, and they used it with the fight.
Paid a foreigner to go interview Russians
Exactly.
to get dirt on their opponent. but apparently it's a problem when the other side tries to get dirt on their opponent from the same people. Yeah, but we didn't pay people to do it.
And here's the thing. Mueller asked to expand his investigation multiple times. He went into tax fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud. He was looking at prostitutes up in Manhattan. He was doing all kinds of things. But he
That's
never,
Paul Manafort, right?
yes, Paul Manafort. But he never asked to look into the Russians, the Hillary campaign, the DNC, the corrupt activities with the FISA court. Why is that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. If we give him the benefit of the doubt, I think the best answer, and we won't know for a few months probably, is that the Inspector General is already looking at some of that.
But the Inspector General can only look at the Department of Justice.
That's right.
It does not have subpoena power.
That's right, and so can't look at the connections out in the campaign world. You're absolutely right.
And then we have Susan Rice, who is the advisor to the president, national security advisor
President Obama.
of Obama. And the head of IT comes there and says, hey, the Russians are trying to tap into our system. This is near the end of their administration. And she, I paraphrase, tells them to stand down, don't write anything, we don't want any paper on this. We have unprecedented unmasking of American citizens going on. By Samantha Power says, it wasn't me. So somebody's unmasking American citizens using her name, among them Lieutenant General Michael Flynn.
Right.
Michael Flynn is encouraged to do an interview without lawyers present. First time, the FBI says, no problem. Second time, Stroke sets him up, and he's fighting for his life.
Right.
We have the Deputy Attorney General at the time, an Obama holdover, Sally Yates, who undertakes an investigation of him under the Logan Act, which nobody has used. That's like the Jaywalking Act that
Right.
nobody enforces. And,
Right.
they use that. With all this going on, is Mr. Nadler interested in any of this?
Yeah, of course not.
Is Mr. Cummings interested in
Of
any
course
of
not.
this? Is Maxine Waters interested in any
Of
of
course
this?
not.
Is Nancy Pelosi interested in any of this?
Absolutely not.
How about 98% of the media? Are they interested in any of this?
Not in the least.
Now, why would that be?
Because it doesn't fit the narrative.
Doesn't fit the narrative, and it doesn't hurt whom?
President who won.
The President of the United States who won. All these activities that are going on, do you think, apart from the base on either side politically, the American people watching this, those who are paying attention,
Right.
which is not most of them, what do you think they make of this?
They see Washington behaving in a way that's irrelevant to their life and spinning their wheels in the mud, and I pick mud intentionally, just practicing the politics of personal destruction. They voted, and I think the average American's view is get on with it. It being the business of government. You know, we look at what's going on the border. There's a desperate need for congressional action. They all acknowledge it and yet do nothing. Instead, they send out subpoenas without a basis to fight wars with the president that have already been investigated by Mueller, and nothing gets done. No progress is made.
Here's what I'm worried about. You're right. They refuse to secure the border.
Right.
And now the so-called manufactured crisis, everybody knows it wasn't manufactured, and it's a 5-alarm fire.
Right.
Action begins in the House of Representatives. They're doing absolutely nothing. Red China's on the move. They're massively increasing their military. Their naval power is incredible right now. Their missile technology is incredible right now.
Right.
They've sent into space kill satellites to kill our satellites, which would kill our ability, our military's ability to target sites and so forth. They're getting bases and strongholds in North Africa, part of our hemisphere. Russia's on the move, same thing. We've got a problem with Iran. That's an understatement.
Yeah, that is.
We've got all these problems going on. And the Democrats in the House of Representatives act like there's nothing going on. As a matter of fact, we just got a report that Social Security is going under in 18 years and Medicare in 8 years. Is there a single proposal
Right.
coming out of the House of
There are single
Representatives?
proposals to blow it up faster with Medicare for all, right? So the mathematics is not a prerequisite to being Congress.
But what about the media? I mean, should there
Well,
be...
as I said earlier, they're the communications arm for the Democrats in the House, really on Capitol Hill. The House Democrats are louder. We hear more from them now, but before the election, we heard as much from Chuck Schumer and his crowd, but they're not in the majority. So it's really turned to the Democrats in the House. And we're going to hear more and more from the Democrat candidates as we approach 2020. And it'll be interesting to see just how crazy extreme they're willing to go to try to pick up votes.
That sounds like they're already there.
Yeah, we think they are. But they're going to come out and they're going to surprise even you and me. In the months to come.
Yeah, well,
Exactly what's left. I don't even want to speculate because it might come true. And they're going to, you heard it here on Levin's show first, they're going to have a contested presidential convention.
oh, really?
They're going to have a contested convention. They don't have winner-take-all states, and they have too many candidates. No one is going to go to their convention with a majority, and it's going to be a dogfight for delegates. Now, that's about 2,500 people, roughly. Where do you think they fall in the Democrat spectrum of activists? And that's who's going to decide their nominee. So we're going to be hearing a lot more about all the craziest stuff, including the not well-based conclusions coming out of the Mueller report from their presidential candidates.
All right. Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, you can watch Levin TV on blazetv.com, blazetv.com. That's our wonderful conservative network over there. Or give us a call at 844-LEVIN-TV, 844-LEVIN-TV. We'll be right back. Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin. This is Life, Liberty, and Levin. Great guest again, Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli.
Good to be with you.
Good to be with you. You were
Kilby filling in for the great Tucker Carlson. His whereabouts are unknown. Meanwhile, guess where we know Joe Biden is? Joe Biden has officially joined the Democratic presidential race. The instant front runner, according to the polls. He hasn't bothered attacking fellow. As America's economy roars ahead, tonight we bring you the truth about the man who says he wants to take us back. Evening, everyone, and welcome to The Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton, and this is the home of positive populism, pro-worker, pro-family, pro-community. On Friday, more confirmation that the central promise of the Trump revolution, to get the economy moving again, is being delivered. Growth up, investment up, incomes up. It is an incredible performance for this stage of an economic expansion, and is the direct result of this administration's pro-enterprise policy agenda. This is Donald Trump's blue-collar boom, delivering historic results for working Americans, exactly as he promised. Meanwhile, this week, we also saw the launch of a presidential campaign built on a pledge to go back to the pre-Trump era, the era of slow growth and wage stagnation. And that's where we start tonight, with the man who wants to take America back to all that. After months of dithering, after pathetically fishing around for a pre-picked VP like Stacey Abrams, after telling us with that move that he himself believes he is too old, too white, too male, and too establishment to win his party's nomination, Joe Biden has finally entered the race for 2020. He says he wants to take America back to normal. Well, tonight, we will show you what Joe Biden's normal really looks like. We'll give you the facts that not only reveal his political vulnerability, but which by the Democrats' own standards make him unfit for the presidency and which should disqualify his candidacy. Joe Biden is tonight's Swamp Watch. Americans voted against the establishment, and since then, as they've seen the establishment close ranks to undermine President Trump, At every turn, the rage against the swamp machine has, if anything, increased. Now, the establishment wants its power back. They're running Joe Biden for president. And it is literally impossible to think of a more establishment politician than him. He is the very definition of a corrupt insider. Biden's been a professional politician for nearly 50 years, and what a record he's built in that time. We know Biden is sexist. His creepy habit of inappropriate touching shows that while he may not actively discriminate against women, in his soul, as you might say, he views women as lesser than men. And of course, his creepy cleanup video didn't fool anyone. It's the same with race. Just listen to how he talks about people from a different racial background.
I mean, you got sort of mainstream African American who is articulate and bright and clean and a nice looking guy. I mean, that's a storybook, man. In Delaware, the largest growth in population is Indian Americans moving from India. You cannot go to a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have a slight Indian accent. I'm not joking.
Again, let's be precise about the point. I'm not saying Biden believes in racial discrimination, but anyone who speaks like that in his soul clearly thinks black and brown people are lesser than white people. We know Joe Biden is verbally incontinent and can barely open his mouth without putting his foot in it. But the thing that is less well known is how irredeemably swampy Biden is. Just for his own use, he has taken $29 million in donations since 1989. That's as far back as the data goes. All those millions mean favors to special interests. Here's just a few highlights from his swampy career. Biden loves to tout his foreign policy experience, and yes, he has plenty of experience with foreign governments, or should I say, their lobbyists. Foreign government lobbying, one of the most inexcusable swamp practices, was all part of the job for Joe Biden when he was chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He took money from lobbyists for Dubai, for the United Arab Emirates, for Ethiopia, for Sri Lanka, for China. More on that later. And yes, for Turkey. Turkey, I seem to remember Democrats getting rather upset when Michael Flynn was accused of lobbying and Turkey. But the biggest payoff for Biden during his time in the Senate came from credit card company MBNA. His craven backing for MBNA in exchange for their cash even earned Biden the nickname the Senator from MBNA. In 2005, Biden backed a bankruptcy bill that protected banks and credit card companies while hurting middle-class families. Biden might say, well, MBNA are headquartered in Delaware. I represent Delaware in the Senate. Of course I'm going to help them. But if it's a senator's job to help businesses based in their state, why do you need to be paid millions of dollars extra to do it? The simple truth is that Biden sided with his donors against working Americans. And that's the real story of his life. His entire office was infested by swampiness. His legislative assistant, Tracy Becker, became a lobbyist for MWW Group. His political director, Ankit Desai, became a lobbyist at the same firm before becoming a lobbyist for Cheniere Energy. Biden's chief counsel became a lobbyist at Mayer Brown in 2008. Biden brought him back to work as an advisory board member for the Obama-Biden transition team. Great. Biden's policy advisor, Michael Halpern, became a lobbyist for DLA Piper, his deputy chief of staff as vice president. Alan Hoffman became the chief lobbyist for PepsiCo before becoming a lobbyist for Herbalife International. On and on it goes. Round and round it spins. Joe Biden's revolving door. 5 decades of favor trading, influence peddling, and corruption. So swampy. But so what? Some might say. They're all like that. Yes, they are. But there's one more thing about Biden. This is what makes him dangerous. This is what should disqualify him from the presidency. Since 2016, the Democrats and their establishment media allies have relentlessly accused President Trump of being a foreign agent or being compromised by a foreign power. Watch.
Well, I certainly think he's acting like someone who's compromised, and it may very well be that he is compromised, or it may very well be that he believes that he's compromised.
Unfortunately, because our commander-in-chief is compromised, and do you believe it's possible that President Trump has been compromised by Russia? They still say it, even though the Mueller investigation concluded that it was all a lie. With Joe Biden, on the other hand, there is a much more worrying relationship with a foreign power, one that represents a vastly bigger threat to America than Russia does. China. In December 2013, then Vice President Biden rode Air Force Two on an official trip to Asia. Tensions were high over disputed territories in the East China Sea. Biden was joined by his son, Hunter, who was building a private equity firm along with his business partner and friend, Chris Heinz, heir of the Heinz ketchup family fortune and son-in-law of then Secretary of State John Kerry. Vice President Biden and Hunter Biden were ushered into Beijing on a red carpet with a delegation of Chinese officials. From there, Joe went straight into meetings with the Vice President of China and President Xi Jinping. The next morning, the Bidens had a meeting with the U.S.-China Business Council. There it was off to Villa number 5 at Diaoqiu State Guest House, where Madame Mao lived during the Cultural Revolution. Joe Biden struck a soft, friendly tone with the Chinese leadership, disappointing allies in the area like Japan, who were alarmed by China's increasing aggression. But perhaps Joe had other issues besides the global balance of power on his mind. Issues like his son's business deals. Hunter's presence on the trip was far from coincidence. Just 10 days later, his company, Rosemont Seneca, signed an exclusive $1 billion deal with the state-owned Bank of China, creating an investment fund called Bohai Harvest, with money backed by the Chinese government. In the words of Peter Schweitzer, who first unveiled these conflicts of interest in his book Secret Empires, the Chinese government was literally funding a business that it co-owned along with the sons of two of America's most powerful decision makers. This is what it looks like to be compromised by a foreign power. And that deal was far from a one-off. In 2011, less than a year after opening his company, Hunter Biden was in China working with a company called Thornton Group to explore business opportunities with Chinese state-owned enterprises. Thornton Group touted the meetings on their Chinese language website, saying Chinese executives, quote, extended their warm welcome to the Thornton Group with its U.S. partner Rosemont Seneca Chairman Hunter Biden, bracket, second son of the now Vice President Joe Biden. Here's a screen grab of that web post captured by the Government Accountability Institute. It features a number of photos of Hunter Biden posing with powerful Chinese officials. Thornton Group was marketing their access to the son of the Vice President to attract business with China. But guess what? The write-up and pictures of those meetings on Thornton Group's Chinese language website did not appear on their English language website. Oh, and here's another curious fact. These meetings occurred just hours before Vice President Joe Biden met with the Chinese president in Washington. In May that same year, Hunter had a second meeting with many of the same Chinese financial powerhouses, just 2 weeks after his dad, the vice president, opened up the U.S.-China strategic dialogue with Chinese officials in Washington. And in 2014, another arm of Hunter's company, Rosemont Realty, began negotiating multi-billion-dollar deals with Gemini Investments, a Chinese firm with ties to the China Ocean Shipping Company, which reportedly operates as an extension of the Chinese military. But it's not even just China. A recent court case gave us a close look at the financial statements of Rosemont Seneca Bohai. Most of the money going out of that account was to Hunter Biden. Wait till you see where some of the money going into it came from. $145,000 from a Kazakh oligarch, $1 million from Chinese entities, of course, $1.2 million from a mysterious LLC tied to a Swiss bank that's been implicated in money laundering, and $3.1 million from corrupt Ukrainian oligarchs. Speaking of corruption in Ukraine, recent reporting by investigative journalist John Solomon revealed that in March 2016, when Ukraine's chief prosecutor, Viktor Shokin, conducted a wide-ranging corruption probe into the natural gas firm Burisma Holdings, of which Hunter Biden, who else, was a board member, his father
withhold $1 billion in loan guarantees from the US government unless that prosecutor was fired. Look, Joe Biden has been through family tragedy that to me seems unendurable, and he's handled it with obvious strength and grace. But he's putting himself forward for the Oval Office, not Oprah. He must be accountable for his actions and the swampiness we've shown you tonight. Joe Biden obviously loves his children and would do anything for them. I feel the same way about mine. But when you're the vice president, you can't run around doing favors for America's enemies to help make money for your son. Think of all the breakfast bloviating these past 2 years about Jared's property dealings and Ivanka's business in China and Moscow Trump hotels that never got built. Most of it, by the way, before Donald Trump became president, and none of it, obviously, influencing policy since this president has been much tougher on Russia than Obama ever was, and is the first president to stand up to China in about 50 years. By contrast, these Biden deals were real. They happened, literally, billions of dollars paid over by the Chinese government to Biden companies when Joe Biden was vice president and when Joe Biden went soft on China. Effectively countering China's rise is the single most important strategic challenge for the next president. How can Joe Biden possibly do that when the Chinese government has been funding Biden family businesses? Just on the basis of what we already know, by the standards the Democrats have set for Donald Trump, Joe Biden is compromised by a foreign power and unfit to be president. But there's a lot more we need to know. What went on in those Beijing meetings in Villa number 5? What promises were made? What favors were exchanged? Why did Joe Biden go soft on China when its aggression and our allies demanded a tough response? To borrow Nancy Pelosi's words, what does China have on Joe Biden, politically, personally, or financially? Here's the bottom line about Joe Biden. He is a fake and a phony. Tomorrow he launches his campaign in a union hall to brand himself a man of the working people. Don't let him fool you. He's trading on a reputation that hasn't been true for decades. When it came to a choice between working Americans and his donors, he chose the donors. When it came to a choice between working Americans and China, he chose China. He may have started out as a blue-collar boy from Scranton, Pennsylvania, but he ended up as a swampy stooge for Beijing, China. Joe Biden is Joe China, and he must never be allowed anywhere near the White House again. Now, this is important information, and we need your help to let everyone know about it. We will post this on Twitter and Facebook, so please follow us at Steve Hilton X and at NextRevFNC, and share tonight's Swamp Watch using the hashtag JoeChina. Thank you. All right, coming up, more on Joe Biden with our amazing panel. The deep significance of last night's Trump rally, plus the Democrats and their establishment media allies still pathetically obsessed with Russia, collusion, obstruction, impeachment, anything except the issues that actually affect you. We've got a great hour of the next revolution. Don't go away. All right, well, I've calmed down a bit, but I'm still angry about Joe Biden. And we're back with more on Joe Biden with our guests for tonight. Claremont Institute President Ryan Williams, Fox Nation host Tommy Lauren, and townhall.com columnist Kira Davis. Tommy, Joe Biden, the floor is yours.
Well, I love your Swamp Watch because I think few people actually understand his background, and you're right, they do think of him as this aw-shucks good old boy, and they think that he's the perfect antidote to the rest of the Democratic contenders who are extreme. But adding on to your Swamp Watch, I want to add one more point. Back in 2014, when speaking to the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Joe Biden also referred to illegal immigrants as already Americans. So the 11 million that are living in the shadows, he considers them already Americans. So that's to add to your Swamp Watch, my biggest concern.
That's a great point, and it just shows really how, he's been so unvetted over the past few years, where he's just been there and sort of, on the side, not actually looked into and really exposed some of the things he's said and done. So this is just the beginning of it. Ryan, I just wanted to ask you a question about what we just saw on Swamp Watch, and particularly the China stuff, which I think is really, really shocking. Happened, let's remind ourselves, when Joe Biden was vice president and this was going on. and changing policy. It's a crucial point there. Don't you think this should be investigated?
Of course.
And how?
I think the prospects for investigation is coming out of the House are dim, considering it's controlled by Democrats and is the front runner, presumptive front runner for now. Really the Senate, it falls on the Senate to do this. And the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is the classic committee for investigating all the smoke you pointed out. But if there's any actual law-breaking fire, it might be the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, which is on the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. So
Well, actually, Steve, the problem is that actually it's swampy but not illegal, because this is what's really, really so terrible about the way it's happening now. Because it's through the family, it's not directly him. No one's making up an accusation. But that's the very reason why I think it needs to be exposed. I think we need to have an investigation into all this.
Well, I think it's an interesting irony that we've been spending the last 2 years investigating Trump over Russia, but people forget that the Obama administration had their hands all over foreign interference. I mean, do you guys recall when he told Medvedev, just wait till I'm elected and then I'll have more flexibility? So this is nothing new. I think it's great that you're exposing this, and I think if Trump is smart, and he is, he's going to run with this idea of Biden not really being who he says he is. But also, I think it might be too late for Biden to run on that working class thing. That ship may have sailed. He is establishment. You mentioned that in your monologue. He is an establishment candidate. He couldn't even get Obama's endorsement.
Yeah, I mean, people think of the establishment, and I'm going to talk about this later. What is really, really interesting, in what sense Donald Trump, he's now the president, of course, technically, yes, that's the establishment, but every day he's behaving still as the outsider, because he knows this is the president, because he knows that people don't want the establishment back. That's what Biden would be.
Well, the establishment doesn't like Donald Trump. There's many of them that try to cozy up to him now, as you can see with recent comments by Mitt Romney and going all the way back to the whole class of people as never Trumpers. They didn't like Donald Trump because he wasn't establishment, so he combats that every day. But I think you're exactly right. How can you pull this, I'm for the working class? What did Obama Biden ever do for the working class? And contrast that to what Donald Trump has done for the working class. It's going to be really hard to run in that. I'm going to be for the working class against Trump's record of actually doing something. And a lot of Obama voters crossed the aisle to vote for Trump. The working class voters that voted for Obama and Biden the first time actually ended up voting for Trump. So I'm not even sure you can count on what traditionally would have been his voting base.
Exactly, and that's why I think actually this kind of message that they probably think is very clever, back to normal before Trump. Actually, normal before Trump for working people was really bad.
That's part of the problem that existed for at least 30 years, right? Or 20 at least.
Yes.
Now, Bernie's probably the better working class threat. He was only recently a millionaire. Biden's not.
Right. All right, well, there's lots more in this direction, because coming up, last night's rally showed why real people across the country love President Trump, and why the D.C. swamp just can't stop hating him. We'll explain next.
Yeah. Lord have mercy.
Oh, I'm driving.
We are a rumor. Recognizable only.
As America's economy roars ahead, tonight we bring you the truth about the man who said he wants to take us back.
Thing that was intentionally designed to do anything wrong or be inappropriate.
I guess having those women sit on his lap and nuzzle them without their permission, nothing inappropriate. Joining me now is Nan Hayworth from the Independent Women's Forum. She's also a former New York Congresswoman. Kathy Aruf, former Washington Post columnist and liberal analyst. And Audrey Decker, conservative commentator. Ladies, will Grope and Smithgate dog Joe Biden, or did he put this to rest?
Well, it sure felt like a sorry, not sorry kind of session. I mean, you know what? If you're gonna, I mean, if you're going to try to be sincere, if you really think that women's issues, and I do not, are limited to these kinds of themes, in the Independent Women's Forum, we say women's issues are the issues that concern us all, especially the economy and national security. About which Joe Biden, frankly, doesn't have all that much to run on. But if you're going to run on that kind of issue, then you go on The View, and you better be prepared to do a bit of humble groveling.
Well, Kathy,
That's what I saw.
Kathy, they clearly sent him out there to put this to rest. Let the big audience. Did he do it?
I think so. He was humble. He was apologetic. He was careful. Absolutely. I mean, he was vague. He was nervous. We didn't want a cocky guy on The View saying I would do it all over again. But he wasn't confident. He wasn't apologetic. I mean, not going to lose him. It wasn't genuine.
Audrey, I want your take on this.
Yeah, he wasn't genuine. He said, if it hurt their feelings, I'm sorry. I mean, that's not a true apology. But to your point, it gets back to what are the issues that affect all women, and there are some. Let's look at the economy now. No one wants to go back to what it was 8 years ago. Women unemployment is the lowest it's been in 65 years. That's what are the important issues that we should be talking about.
Okay. There was another moment in this interchange with The View, a very uncomfortable moment. We'll apologize. You're sorry. I think we can clean this up right now.
Well, by the way, I did. I understand. Look, I'm not going to judge whether or not it was appropriate that she had, or whether she thought it was sufficient. What I said privately, what I said publicly. I'm sorry she was treated the way she was treated.
I don't know why it took you so long to call her. I wish it had happened earlier.
What I didn't want to do, and I didn't want to quote invade her space.
I think what she wants you to say is, I'm sorry for the way I treated you, not for the way you were treated. I think that's going to be her answer.
Well, but I'm sorry the way she got treated.
Now, did you catch that? The way she got treated, using the passive voice. In other words, not my fault. Will this hurt him, Kathy? Anita Hill's holding out an apology.
No, it's not going to hurt him. It's going to be a great meme. And they're all going to be memes because everything counts 6 weeks before an election. So he's just trying to be the candidate for the Democratic
So liberal women will put this aside.
We're going to forget this. I mean, this is going to be forgotten just like something much worse. The things he said on that bus with Billy Bush, much worse. Much worse. This is nothing in comparison. This is a meme at best.
Now, stop. He did. That was talk. That was trash talk, which frankly, you men do. Go to a bar. You can hear them talk like this. I do from going to bars. You can hear them talk like this. I'll take you to one.
Right. Okay. But, you know, here's what I think everybody needs to remember. Virtue signaling is not virtue. Words are not deeds. And personalities are not sources. So when we are judging any of these candidates, I can look at President Trump and say, I know what he has done for America's women. You've heard women. No.
One at a time. Andrea, how has he helped women in your estimation?
Well, look at the unemployment rate. America's stronger today on the international stage than it was 8 years ago. Our economy is stronger than it was 8 years ago. He's appointed 6
40% Donald Trump. Is this a problem for the president?
I think it's an opportunity for the president, and I think that President Trump has been, and we have seen just in the past couple of months how the press accounts of even how our tax breaks have gone for people have been badly distorted by the left. People don't actually know, amazingly enough, the real story about what's going on with this economy and what's going on with the benefits that the president's provided. It's his opportunity to make that case.
Kathy, when you peek deeper into this poll or dig deeper into it, on trust with the economy, who would best handle the economy? 49% Trump wins, 33% for Biden. Who will be best at keeping America safe? 46% Trump, 35% Biden. What does that tell you?
Tell me right now how people are feeling, but what's going to happen 6 weeks before the election? How are they going to feel 6 weeks before the election? Right now, it's all about becoming the candidate. So Biden just needs to get past all of these issues, get all this out of the way, and then talk about the real issues.
Well, aren't these real issues? Security, economy.
They are.
How important, how decisive will those two issues be for women voters going into this next?
Oh, they're very important, and I think you have to look at the trajectory that America is on right now, and we're heading in a very good direction. So to go back to the policies that we had before is something that I don't know that women are going to want to do, and those numbers are very, very strong. But to your point, Americans get to make their decision. Women get to make their decisions, and they're going to have two very different policies and political philosophies to choose from.
Okay, I want to move on to this. Today on The View, and look, I believe the culture informs a lot of this. And Joe Biden is appearing on The View. He's there for most of the show. He not only addressed some of the things that had tied up his campaign in the early days, but he wept over his son, Beau Biden, who died a few years ago, very close. Does that in any way connect him to American women and show a vulnerability that perhaps President Trump hasn't shown?
Yes, Raymond, it is a very sympathetic trait, and Vice President Biden is exceedingly good at those kind of sentimental moments. And again, personalities are not policies, and what Americans need most desperately is policies that work in their lives, because those are the things that make it possible for us to create good lives for our loved ones.
Kathy, how do you think this will affect women, particularly women who are not particularly political, but they're walking and bear this?
Those are the ones who are going to decide. Those are the ones who are going to decide this election. So we've got the ones very Trump, we've got the ones very Democrat, but the people deciding the election are going to be those women who want the best for their children and the future. The suburban moms are going to decide this election. Trump wins. I don't think so for our future.
Andrea, you have the last word.
Yeah, I mean, certainly you feel for him, and there's a lot of people that have gone through tragedy, and he can relate to that in a deep way. But at the end of the day, it goes back to policy.
We'll see how this plays out, Audrey and Kathy. Thank you all for being here. After his lame attempt to answer his critics, Joe Biden spent the rest of the time on The View discussing what was really the focal point of his campaign launch video, the Charlottesville events in August of 2017.
I wrote an article at the time in the Atlantic magazine back when Charlottesville happened, and saying that this is not who we are. There's an American creed. It's about decency, honor, including everyone, leaving no one behind. I guess it was like I don't remember that ever happening in an administration before. And all of this, gentlemen,
is this a legitimate campaign opener for Biden? And your reaction to the president's comments there? I'll start with you, Siobhan.
It was absolutely a legitimate issue. I mean, the Charlottesville incident really spoke to the character of President Trump. He said that there was blame to go along on both sides, and clearly with white nationalists, white supremacists, who caused the death of a person connected to that incident. So it's absolutely a legitimate issue. Race and culture has been a major fault line in our country, and we need a president that will bring this country together, not tear it apart.
Candace, your take on that? I mean, Siobhan just reiterated what Biden said, that the president called white supremacists fine people. Is that what really happened?
That's exactly not what happened. And you can go and you can look up the full speech of what Trump said. He specifically said, I am not speaking about white supremacists or Nazis. So this is not a legitimate issue at all. And what's really bizarre is that Joe Biden, of all people, would use this as a way to launch his campaign. This is a man who was mentored by Robert Byrd, a literal KKK member. This is a man that said that black people should remain segregated in 1972 because it's what we wanted. He has issues with black America, and I'm really
got him right where he wants him already. But it's really, it's so painful to hear the Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, sit up here and brag on a traitor, brag on someone who's committing an act of treason to defend one of the most abominable institutions in the history of the world. It's painful. It's wrong. It's wrong-headed. It's beneath him, beneath the office of president. But from a political point of view, Joe Biden just shows the world. He knows how to put a banana peel in front of Donald Trump and watch him fall.
Candace, is Biden
Crap, are we watching?
We're listening to some bullshit stuff that's being said, and he's having to, what's the name there, tell whether it's true or not.
They have nothing that's new. To me, Joe Biden is the new Hillary Clinton. They're all going to celebrate him. They're going to claim the polls say that he's highly favored, when in fact he is not. He's not at all